So I'm using a watercolour sketchbook and I'm just taping down some washi tape to create a lovely white border, which is a really nice way of presenting your work once finished. For step 1, I'm going to draw the picture using an HB pencil. So I'm just sketching in a horizon line below halfway and then a simple path that leads from the bottom of the paper to the horizon line at a point, and this is 1 point perspective and it creates depth in your painting. And I'm just creating some grasses and then some trees above the horizon, and this is all from my imagination. For step 2, I'm going to paint the sky wet into wet. I'm using just 3 colours, 3 primary colours: ultramarine, alizarin crimson and Hansa yellow light, and I will have alternative colours in the description below. So I'm mixing up some colours for the sky. I've started off with ultramarine with a pinch of the alizarin crimson and a little bit of water to make a big puddle for the sky. Then alizarin crimson on its own, and then alizarin crimson mixed with yellow. So I'm wetting the sky with a large mop brush down to the horizon. I'm loading my brush with the yellow, with the alizarin crimson, and painting that over the tree area, and then the alizarin crimson on top. And this is basically to stop the blue with the alizarin crimson turning green. And now I'm painting that wet into wet with my size 8 brush, leaving gaps for clouds, creating a natural looking sky, working wet into wet using my size 8 brush. So just sort of shaping the sky here, loading the brush again and just painting smaller marks as I go towards the horizon. As I work my way to the top of the sky, I'm going to make the paint slightly darker. That's by adding a little bit more of the blue, and that's to create the illusion of depth because the top of the sky is nearest to us, so the tonal values will be darker. For step 3, I'm going to paint the trees wet into wet using ultramarine and the yellow. And I've used about 70% blue and 30% yellow. And I'm painting this wet in wet with my size 8 brush. And this is a blue-green, and blue colours can sort of appear to be cooler and cooler colours recede. So I want these to be for the distant trees, and it's again to create depth in my painting. Next, I'm going to add a little bit more yellow to make a green. And this is going to be more for the middle ground trees, and they come forward a little bit more because they're a bit warmer and a bit brighter, and making them a little bit bigger as well. For step 4, I'm going to paint the grasses and the path wet on dry. So I am mixing up the Hansa yellow light with the ultramarine, and it's about 50-50. And I'm using a large mop brush and I'm painting wet on dry the grasses here to the left. And I'm painting the grasses wet on dry to the right hand side here as well. I am mixing up some more ultramarine into the green there. So again, it's a blue-green colour, and I'm painting this around the horizon area wet into wet using my size 8 brush. Mixing up some more of the yellow and ultramarine, slightly thicker, less water, and I'm painting this damp into wet on top of those grasses there to create more depth in the painting. Mixing up more ultramarine now with a pinch of the yellow, a lot less water. So this is a darker colour now because it has less water, so the paint is thicker, but also because you have more blue, so it makes a stronger colour. And I'm making it even stronger here right in the foreground, and you can see when you work wet on dry you get all those sparkly sort of textured bits there because the paper is dry, and whereas you can see in the distant trees there it's all kind of a bit smoother, and that's the kind of difference you get working wet on dry. And if you look at the edge of the path you get lovely crisp edges as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm mixing up all 3 colours to make a neutral colour. Practice using those colours. You can get such a variety of different colours just by adding different percentages. So I'm just painting the path here with my size 8 brush wet on dry. Mixing up some more ultramarine with a pinch of the alizarin crimson and yellow. So again, the 3 primary colours. And I'm just going to paint some shadows on the path now. So it's slightly thicker paint, less water. And it just adds a bit of interest to the path. Add a little bit more ultramarine here and just painting smaller marks as I go off into the distance, damp into damp. So mixing up even the thicker colour now, as you can see, it's quite creamy. So mixing up a blue-green, adding the alizarin crimson to make a lovely, delicious dark colour, painting this damp into damp on the edge of the path there, sort of darker grasses to really frame the path. And what happens when you work damp into damp, the paint kind of stays put and doesn't run as much as wet into wet, as you can see with those trees in the background. For step 5, I'm going to paint the trees wet on dry, mixing up ultramarine with the yellow, a little bit more ultramarine to make a blue-green, and then a pinch of the alizarin crimson to make a lovely, delicious dark green. I'm using the belly of the brush, that's the centre of the brush, as I'm showing you here. And what happens is when you use that part, the paint doesn't flow off the brush like it would if you were tilting the brush and using the tip of the brush. And that way you get lovely textures. And I usually call this technique side brush, dry brush. And it's great for trees or anywhere where you want to create some textures. And I'm sort of using a more of a yellow green there, and I'm painting that damp into damp using the belly of my brush to create that texture. Adding a little bit more pink and ultramarine. It's almost a sort of dark brown colour, and I'm painting this just above the horizon there, damp into damp, again using the belly of the brush so the paint doesn't flow as much. If your paint is flowing too much, add less water or take the excess paint off on a paper towel. So as you can see, I'm just adding the details damp into damp, varying the sort of colours. This is a lot darker now because I've added more of the ultramarine, and I'm cutting into the grasses beneath to really define the horizon here. For step 6, I'm going to spatter the foreground and paint tree trunks and branches. So I've just added some more water and ultramarine to the previous wash, and I have spattered the foreground to create texture and also to create depth in my painting. So I'm mixing up the ultramarine with the alizarin crimson and the yellow, and it's to make a really sort of dark brown colour for the tree trunks and branches. And I'm painting using my liner brush damp into damp on top of the foliage there. As you can see, it's very effective. And again, painting damp into damp, the paint doesn't run as much, but you get these lovely soft edges and they kind of look a little bit further away. So I'm just sort of painting using the tip of the brush there to create that detail. I'm just adding this to the foreground grasses as well. So the grasses are bigger, sort of right at the bottom of the paper where it's in the foreground, and as the grasses go away, they get smaller. And again, this is to create depth in the painting. For step 7, I'm going to paint some people wet on dry. So again, I've used the 3 primary colours mixed together to create a dark colour. And I am painting kind of like an arched window here shape. And I'm using the liner brush, just use a small brush, and these are little people so they're further away, but it just creates interest in your painting. So I'm mixing up a little bit more ultramarine now, and I'm painting sort of the legs, but literally it's just one sort of long sort of thin triangle, and I'm just widening it at the top there at the hips. I'm just lifting off some of the dark green paint from the trees because I want to put the person's head here, of course, but I want it to be dark against light. That's why I've lifted off the green paint to make that area lighter so I can put a dark sort of head on there later. So painting the next person, I've just changed those neutral colours slightly by adding more of the alizarin crimson. Painting this pretty much wet on dry and painting these sort of legs. This time I've separated them slightly. They're just 2 long, thin triangles there. And now I'm just painting the head of the person on the left there, pretty much wet on dry, and the person on the right as well. I'm just lifting off some paint here to the person on the right, just to create a little bit of light coming from the right and adding more shadow there on the left, and doing the same to the person on the left. And to ground these people, I'm mixing up ultramarine with a pinch of the pink and yellow, and I'm painting some shadows, cast shadows from the people to the left there because the light is coming from the right. For step 8, I'm going to use some white paint to create light and highlights. I'm going to spatter the foreground and sponge the trees using a natural sponge to create texture. So I'm just painting some light just here and there using the liner brush, pretty much wet on dry, and it kind of just highlights the people a little. And I've watered down the gouache slightly, and I am spattering wet on dry in the foreground to create the look of wild flowers and also texture and detail and light. So I'm using a natural sponge. You can use a synthetic sponge. Dip it into water and wring out the sponge so it's damp. Mix up some milky paint. So I'm mixing up here ultramarine and yellow. I'm applying it directly to the sponge and I'm tapping very gently onto the dried surface to create some texture for the trees. I'm mixing up a darker green now, using a little bit more ultramarine and pink and yellow, and I'm sponging this damp into damp on top of the previous sponging here, and you can see it really brings those trees to life. I thought it'd be quite nice just to add a few birds. They're little V shapes using my liner brush and using a dark colour, mixing 3 of the primaries together. And then just finishing off with a few more highlights here, wet on dry. I'm removing the washi tape, and as you see, it reveals a lovely white border. It's a really nice way of presenting your work and also deciding whether you need to do any more to your painting. So I've decided just to add a few more dots of white, stippling with my brush, making those flowers a little bit bigger in the foreground and smaller as they go off into the distance to create depth in my painting. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial and it inspires you to have a go at painting something similar. I am going to be running a watercolour retreat in France where we will have the opportunity to paint together and eat together some amazing chef prepared French cuisine and sample some lovely French wine, hopefully. If you want to know a little bit more, come check out these photographs. We will have exclusive access to a vast countryside estate with its stunning views. I do lots of demonstrations where you can all gather round, watch and ask me questions. And it also gives me an opportunity to watch you paint and to give you advice. Mealtimes really does give everyone a chance to get to know one another, enjoying sumptuous meals prepared by our very own chef. I'm also looking forward to the trips that Utrecht have organised. One to the medieval town of Albi, where we get the chance to visit the Toulouse-Lautrec Museum, and also an opportunity to sketch outside as well, this lovely ancient town. If you would like any more information about the retreat, please contact Utrecht. Links for Utrecht can be found in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.